Welcome back into the Dynasty Nerds YouTube page. I'm Garrett Price, and we are continuing our series of top 100 players of the 2000s for fantasy football. Now, if this is your first video you're watching, you're going to want to go back and watch the last one where we covered 100 through 91. Some really exciting names, and some names you're like, wow, that guy made the cut. Some very interesting guys. But here today, we're going to be talking about players 90 through 81. And let's start off with the first. That's right, the first wide receiver for the Packers we're going to be talking about on today's episode. There's two of them, just a hint. The first one today, Donald Driver. That's right, Donald Driver for the Green Bay Packers. Donald Driver had 3 straight seasons of wide receiver 1 production, then followed it up with 3 straight seasons of wide receiver 2 production, and even at one point reached the heights of getting all the way up to wide receiver 4 overall. So he and Brett Favre were a great connection. And then towards the end of his career, he was there with Aaron Rodgers as well. But overall, he had great quarterback play. But he was so consistent for that 6-year stretch. You knew you could put him in your lineup each and every week, and he was going to get you either wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 potential each and every time. And that's huge because you want that consistency out of a player if you're going to be drafting him fairly high. Donald Driver gave you to you for 6 straight seasons. Player number 89, we're going over to Minnesota, so staying in the same division, but we're going to be talking about Dalvin Cook. Yes, Dalvin Cook, his career wasn't quite as long as some other guys, but he reached some pretty nice heights overall. Dalvin Cook had 2 seasons where he was a top 6 running back and got all the way up to running back 2 overall in 2020. Had another running back 1 season in 2022. And in between there, he had a running back 2 season in 2021. Now, the thing that kind of kept him away is early on, he had some injuries in his career, and he also dealt with some later on, moved on from Minnesota, and kind of at that point things fizzled out. But for a 4-year stretch, for a running back is a decent amount of time. For a 4-year stretch, he was a truly elite upside running back that could get you great points both in the running game and in the receiving game. So we put Dalvin Cook here at 89. In 88, we have another current guy. It's Mark Andrews. Yes, I know he's still fairly young overall, but Mark Andrews had 4 straight seasons where he was not only a tight end 1, but he was a top 6 guy. So you're getting that difference maker production out of the tight end situation. Then you go to 2021, first guy to dethrone Travis Kelce as the number 1 overall tight end in about 5 seasons. So huge season with Lamar Jackson there. But unfortunately, we could have seen him even higher on this list, but this past season, he was injured midway through the season, and we kind of lost that year. But with how long tight ends are playing, even at the age of 29, we're still going to get a lot of years left out of Mark Andrews. I would not be surprised to see another 4 or maybe even 5 top 6 tight end finishes in his career. And if that's the case, forget about the 80s. We're talking about a top 40 type of player in fantasy football. That tight end, if you have a good one, it's such an edge. And so far, Mark Andrews has been giving you that edge in his early parts of his career. At 87, we have Curtis Martin. Yes, the running back that started in the 90s. And unfortunately, we're not counting any of that, but still a guy that could get credit for both great production early in his career in the 90s, but later on after his Patriots career in the 2000s, he was with the Jets, and he was still fantastic with the Jets as well. 3 top 6 finishes along that time. Then he also had 2 more running back 2 seasons during that same span. So those first 5 years of the 2000s, Curtis Martin was truly an elite option and a very consistent one at that. But if we were able to give him credit for the stuff he did in the 90s, this is one of the most underrated running backs right now in the Hall of Fame. When we're talking about some of the greatest running backs of all time, his name isn't necessarily brought up, but his consistency year after year, putting up 1,000-yard season after 1,000-yard season, Curtis Martin was so good and is very deserving of a spot in our top 100. 86, we have Rod Smith. Rod Smith, a guy that played in some of those Super Bowls with the Broncos, one of the main receiving options for John Elway. But another one where if we could include the 90s, this guy would be awesome, but still got a spot in our top 100, despite only getting part of his career in here. Yes, if we were to get all of it, things would move up inside the top 50, but we still had 2 finishes where he was a top 3 wide receiver. That was in 2000 and in 2001. He finished as a top 3 receiver in fantasy football, but then he gave you 4 more seasons of wide receiver 2 production. So another 6-year stretch where he was a very valuable fantasy asset, but especially early on in the 2000s, that is where he really made work and really catapulted him up this list, because otherwise we wouldn't have him in here. But really good wide receiver, really productive player for those early Broncos. At 85, we have DeMarco Murray. DeMarco Murray, another one where running back wise, we didn't get a huge long career, but we got a nice spike right in the midst of his prime. Looking at DeMarco, 2013 to 2017 was his prime seasons there. Another guy with 3 top 6 seasons at the running back. Those top 6 years are so big. Guys that you're just counting on week in and week out to carry your team. He even had a top 3 season in 2014, then followed it up. He had 2 running back 2 seasons over that stretch. So a really nice 5-year stretch for DeMarco Murray, where we had that high peak performance with those running back 2 seasons to kind of help complete this package that we need to get inside the top 100. 84, we have Saquon Barkley. Yes, Saquon Barkley. What could have been had we not had those injury-riddled seasons in 2000 and in 2001? But he was so good in his rookie campaign. Number 1 overall running back, just barely edging out the great Christian McCaffrey in 2018. He had 3 total running back 1 seasons. But man, if we could have had the production over the course of 2000 and 2001, but now he's with the Philadelphia Eagles, and his time with the Eagles, where he's going to be the featured guy behind what should still be a pretty good offensive line. We could still see more RB1 production. So this is another player that, while he's active, he could still climb this list. I don't expect him to climb into the top 50, but who knows what could happen over the next 2 or 3 seasons. At 83, we have Justin Jefferson. Yes, only 4 years into his career, and Justin Jefferson has already cracked our top 100 at 83. And man, he could even be higher had he not been injured this past year. I feel like we have a lot of guys in this range where injuries have really derailed what could be some elite fantasy football numbers. He was on pace for another wide receiver 1 overall. We're not just talking about wide receiver 1 overall season, which would have shot him up the board. But still, he had great numbers this past season. So when he was playing, he was a very productive asset. But before that, we have wide receiver 1 overall in 2002. And in 2021 and in 2020, we have, in his rookie year and second season, top 6 finishes at the position. So now we have a guy that signed a huge new deal, but he doesn't have Kirk Cousins anymore. So we'll see how much that affects his overall wide receiver numbers. But I expect when it's all said and done, we're going to be talking about Justin Jefferson as one of the greatest wide receivers and one of the best fantasy football assets that we've had overall in our time in the 2000s. I wasn't sure if this guy was going to crack the list, but Big Ben Roethlisberger has in fact made it inside our top 100. And what really helped him is in 2018, one of his final seasons, he eked out a top 3 overall finish at the position. And that really boosted things, because over the stretch of his career, it was pretty hit and miss with Big Ben, but he was better later on in his career than he was in the early parts. And he got us 6 quarterback 1 seasons, and 3 of those where he was inside of the top 6. So while we might not have the consistency overall that we would want from Big Ben, but some peaks that he had over his very long career kind of helped put him at this point where he just eked inside this top 100. And this was our second quarterback that we talked about in this group. I mentioned in the open, we have 2 Packer wide receivers, And the other one here is Jordy Nelson at 81. Jordy Nelson, 2 top 3 seasons, which is huge. When you can have those types of seasons, that's amazing. Had an additional top 6 season as well. So 3 top 6 seasons with 2 of those being inside the top 3. Now the peak was pretty nice. Wasn't as much longevity as we've gotten out of some of these other receivers because he only had 1 additional season where he was a wide receiver 2 and no other wide receiver 1 season. So not a guy with the longest career, but the peak was so good. So over a 5-year stretch here, you had 4 seasons where you felt great about what you were getting out of Jordy Nelson. All right, guys, that concludes 90 through 81, but make sure to stay tuned. We're releasing a new one of these each and every day. So keep coming back to the YouTube page Monday through Friday, and then we'll take a break over the weekend. And then the next Monday through Friday, we'll do the 50 through 1. So appreciate you guys tuning in with us. We'll see you next time.